Johnson, I would like to warmly welcome the panellists, our distinguished guests, including the many guests who are joining us online on this really lovely Thursday afternoon. At Johnson & Johnson, we are really proud of the role we play in Irish life. This includes a long-standing contribution to the economy, as well as our contribution to public health through the development and provision of new treatments for patients. We're also really proud to partner with the IIEA, a thought leader that provides an important platform for Irish and European experts to share insights, inform public debate, and shape policy decisions. Johnson & Johnson is delighted to sponsor this discussion series on developing a life sciences vision for Ireland. While the first panel discussion a few months ago explored economic benefits, this second panel discussion today, Insights from Europe on Health Innovation, will consider how Ireland can shape its strategy through a healthcare lens. This event today is particularly timely as it follows the publication just last week of the EU Life Sciences Strategy, which I'm sure we'll hear more about later on. With a holistic approach from lab bench to world-class manufacturing to patient bedside, a new national strategy for Ireland could open up opportunities for the entire life sciences sector in Ireland. That includes clinicians, researchers, academics, industry, and most importantly, and above all, patients. We're delighted to facilitate the important discussion today, and I look forward to hearing from our distinguished speakers. So with that, I'll hand back to you, Richard, our chairperson for the afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks very much indeed. And thanks indeed to J&J, a very good friend of Ireland over many, many years, as I know, having served in the Department of Industry in 3 decades. So I know J&J from all sides. I think, as you said, that on the last occasion, this is part of a 2-session. On the last occasion, this issue was viewed very much from the perspective of the enterprise sectors. We had IIEA Ireland, also from the point of view of countries like Denmark and Sweden who have successfully developed life science strategies, and Mark Ferguson looking at how the research environment looks upon these challenges. And what we learned, I suppose, was collaboration is absolutely vital within government and across the silos of government, across technologies, across the sector through public and private partnership, and through developing new funding sources. We also heard a little bit about where the boot pinches, so to speak, in terms of the interaction with the health sector around things like procurement, around test beds, access to test beds, around data sharing, around challenge funding for innovation, and the need for structures that can bring people together. So this time we're looking, I suppose, at this from the health perspective lens, not leaving behind the core of this, which is develop a life science sector, but seeing it from the point of view of the health service and from the patient. So we're very fortunate to have Professor Mary Horgan, who is the Chief Medical Officer in the Department of Health, and she's going to talk to us about how, as her role in Chief Medical Officer, she views the power of innovation, the constraints upon it, and how the sector and the health service can engage in a win-win relationship.
Thank you very much. So I suppose my background puts me in a good position to have seen the health sector from a whole lot of different perspectives. So I'm a clinician in infectious diseases, and I'm academic. I was Dean of the Medical School and of President of RCPI, which are obviously both education and with universities, the research component, and now into policy and legislation and direction of travel of the health service. And I suppose there are challenges, but there are certainly huge opportunities. And I think why Ireland is so strong, in my opinion, is the strength of its workforce, and that's underpinned by our educational system. Many of us, certainly in my generation, had the opportunity to work abroad, and see how things are done differently, not necessarily better, but differently. And I think sometimes we underestimate the good quality of care that we get in Ireland. Our media predominantly focuses on the negativity, but the vast majority of people, whether it's in primary or secondary care, or even at a population health level, really do get good care. And I think it's important that we remind people of that, because there's a workforce that work really hard, and to have negativity all the time isn't how we attract the best people, whether it's in healthcare in general, but also in research. Secondly, I think we have a huge opportunity with the large industry, particularly in medical devices and in pharma. We are hugely well positioned in making and taking the opportunities of being involved in clinical trials, and being involved in new initiatives around AI. I think the challenge is, I suppose, a rapid deployment of our digital infrastructure, which has, I think, momentum over the last few years, and with a huge amount of development. And we do need good data, good understanding of what our population needs, that we can get involved. And I suppose a few big initiatives that happened during the pandemic and now are trying to streamline access of our patients to clinical trials, and of our public-private partnerships, often with universities, and into our health service, so that they can access through all appropriate means data, so we can predict the needs not only of our population but of those, because we're very much linked into Europe. And I think some big initiatives were our National Research Ethics Committee. I was fortunate enough to chair the first one of those in the pandemic, and that's now extended to clinical trials and to medical devices. We need to be in that space. And another initiative the department is doing, a soon-to-be published report led by Professor Donal Brennan, on clinical trials. They need to be in an ethical framework, but get through a lot of the red tape much easier, so that we really can participate in clinical trials that are really, really important for our patients, to improve not only lifespan, but quality of life, which I think is really important. We always talk about lifespan, but you need the most amount of healthy years possible. So I think it really is embracing opportunities that we have now, but with the upcoming presidency in the EU this time next year, we should be really showcasing what we do in things like medical devices in particular, which is an area, I think, of opportunity for Ireland when it comes to in the EU, and obviously the medicines in general. We have the willingness, we have the talented workforce, and it's really working together, not just in health, but across other government departments, and not just in healthcare. I think I get most of my really good ideas from people in business, and Ronan may speak to that. So business, engineering, biotech, and really leaving our comfort zone so that we can be innovative and, as they take calculated risks in the direction of travel for our health service.
Thanks very much. Our next speaker is Anne van Gijssel, who is involved in a similar initiative in Belgium, which has, I suppose, paved the way. And we'd be very interested to hear from you what Ireland can learn. Are there benchmarks that you have sort of set in Belgium that might be exemplars of good practice that we could be pursuing, or are there things that we could learn in any other way from your initiatives?
Thank you. I'll introduce a little bit how we are approaching it, and then who am I to say what you should pick up? But anyways, maybe it can give you some inspiration. So my background, I'm a molecular biologist from training, but I think my career has been identified by how can we get these wonderful innovations that start in research entities or in universities actually into the market and with the patient. So currently, I'm here as the CEO of BioVia, which is actually the new unified cluster for both biotechnology, biopharma, and medical devices, medical equipment, health tech, digital health. It used to be addressed by different associations, and recently we brought everything together in one new entity. And bringing that under one roof actually allowed us to build a real powerful innovation engine. And I think that model was, of course, specifically designed for Flanders, which is the north part of Belgium. But our counterpart in Wallonia, which is the south part, is BioWin, and also a one cluster bringing together all the biopharma, biotech, and medtech companies. And not only the companies, it really brings together all the stakeholders, research institutes, academia, hospitals, and industry, from startup spin-outs up to the large entities such as J&J, of course. I think the difference between the two regions is that we in Flanders, or BioVia, is really industry driven, meaning that we are set up as a public-private partnership with the government, but the government has only less than 20% stake in our budget. Everything else comes from industry and collaborations that we set up. I think, and I hope I got my figures right, Flanders and Ireland, above 6 million inhabitants, more or less. I think we're both powerhouses, I dare to say, in biotech and life sciences. Well connected to the rest of Europe, to the world. And I think each in our own way, we built that reputation. Like I said, by bringing together all innovation players, I really dare to say that in Belgium, we really have one of the most integrated innovation ecosystems in Europe. We have collaboration through the whole value chain, from research institutes up to hospitals. And that means that we are not only at the heart of where innovation is being developed, it also allows us, we're not always taking the advantages, to some lots of room for improvement, but still it allows us to move faster from really research innovations up to real world solutions that can get into the patients, into the hospitals. And I think it's paying off. Today, Belgium is #1 in biopharma exports. More than 80 billion worth of medicines, vaccines are being shipped per year worldwide, 25% to the US. So we have some challenges, I guess, like many of us. But it's not just the production base. We're really at the core where innovations are being invented. Innovations and technologies are being invented in our region. I think that's really the core of the strategy that Flanders has chosen, that Belgium has chosen in moving forward. And as an organization, we don't only just connect the dots, we really co-fund into projects. So, and especially in medical devices, we have a separate fund that we actually put into the most risky, the most bold projects that we currently have. Biopharma, yes, there is a lot of innovation support there, but I think you already referred to it, medical devices, digitalization, how to bring that into an active ecosystem in healthcare is a challenge. And we have additional funding that through the government we can put in place towards the companies. Sure.
Any specific models, say, around issues like procurement, where tend to be the tricky ones, or data sharing? Have you developed protocols that make it quicker, easier to access those routes?
Yes, there are. It's interesting because it came both from the government, and in addition, it came from industry collaborating with the research institutes, actually to build data sharing models. We're not there yet, but I think over the last 5 years, lots has changed. I think initially it was very hard for hospitals as well to share data, and then you have data that you can share for research or data that you can share patient data. So there's quite some issues. I don't think I have to explain that, and you're probably going into more detail on that. But we have a few models that are there that allow patients stay in control of the data, but it can still be used, or it can be used for research or for other applications there. So I think that's really an important element of moving that forward. Yes.
Well, thanks very much indeed. And our next speaker is going to be Nicholas Bloomberg, and we're very privileged to have Nicholas online. He's involved in the Innovative Health Initiative, which essentially spans a number of member states, quite a number of member states. And so he has a unique insight into how this can be created into a win-win for both patients and the health system and the sector. So it'd be very interested to hear how this has been achieved and also where national life science strategies might fit in your wider perspective.
Well, thank you very much. And first, thank you very much for having me online. I'm sorry I couldn't join the conversation today. I would love to be part of the discussions. So the Innovative Health Initiative we are a public-private partnership. We're funded by the European Union through the European Commission and the health industries of Europe. And so all our projects are essentially funded to 50% by the public through the European Commission and 50% through either companies or, in many projects, also philanthropic funders who come in. But that's about IHI. Really, I think the question was around patient and healthcare system involvement. And I think that's something that we prided ourselves on as an initiative, to really try to find ways of bringing in patient voices in a deep and meaningful ways. And I think far too often you bring in their patient organizations as an advisory. And so the research happened in one part of the project and the advisory sit on the sort of the outer rims of the galaxy. And we've tried to find ways of encouraging our projects to bring in patients at the center. And I think increasingly that's really very important. I just give you a few examples. So if we start with digital health. So if we look at our portfolio, about 92% of our projects are using artificial intelligence. Very many of them are using data from mobile devices. And I think it's difficult to imagine sort of more intrusive research than something that's monitoring patients 24/7, whatever they do. And so in order to do this in an interesting and, I think ethical way, you really need to involve the patient organizations and in many cases the philanthropic foundations with large communities into the design of the projects. And I think if you do that, you suddenly open up not only to do research in a different way, but you actually open up to a completely different set of research and innovation. And so one example we've looked at depression, where there's been essentially looking at social withdrawal by monitoring the surrounding noise of people's phones. Now, that's in principle very intrusive research, but actually doing it right with the people living with disease from the start, you can do these type of projects. So if there's one plea or one recommendation I have for the work is really to think about how you, on a national scale, also make sure that you bring in the voice of those living with disease, because I think it will enable you to do not only science differently, but a different type of science. Healthcare systems is much the same. And I think if I can draw on two examples I've seen across Europe, I think Denmark has a very interesting model, which is now funded by the Novo Foundation, where they are trying to put the innovation departments of the hospitals in the driving seats and articulate what are the nationwide innovation needs, and then use that as a basis for projects and procurements. And again, I think this is a really interesting model when you start to think about life science strategies, because it's an opportunity to articulate and develop a sort of public-driven model for public-private partnerships. So I'll end with, so we fund public-private partnerships, and I just have to say that, and I think that will echo some of you, it's not always easy, right? It's there are many blockers and potential barriers. It's the conflict of interest, it might be timelines, decision makings, and the public need for accountability and transparency that makes for some quite complicated rules and regulations for the companies. And I think that's an area where the strategy really helped. And so, I mean, it sounds a bit motherhood and apple pie, but I think the really key is to define the right topics for public-private partnerships, because you need to think through where there is the value proposition, an area where all stakeholders can derive value, because there is an opportunity cost for everyone involved. So I think that's one of the fundamental sort of challenges. The other is to really think through how you can establish a trust that allow you to have difficult conversations between the stakeholders. And you need a sort of a neutral platform that allow these robust conversations to happen, but also a platform then that sets out a framework for delivery of results, because actually delivering results is what breeds trust in the long run. So I'll stop there, but hopefully that's a few thoughts for me to getting started.
No, I think there are very brilliant insights that would inform us a strategy on how you approach one. Thank you very much indeed. I should have said at the outset that there is a Q&A function for those who are online and want to pose questions to any of our speakers. There is that function, so you can send them in at any point. And there will be obviously questions for people in the room here. And J&J will be continuing this discussion on social media. So if you want to continue after today's, there will be an opportunity to do that as well. So our next speaker is Gwyn Morley, who her expertise is in data, health data, clinical trials, and data analytics. You're with, I was going to say quintiles, but that is the wrong thing to say.
Name the company.
Indeed, just showing my age, I haven't caught up. But we would be really interested to get your insights, what other countries have done, how they have cracked some of these knotty problems around data and collaboration.
Yes, so thank you. Delighted to be here this afternoon. I guess from an industry perspective, we applaud this, this foresight of the Irish government to introduce a life science strategy. I think we've been a phenomenal global medicine success story. And obviously in the current geopolitical environment, the life science strategy is going to be particularly important, particularly with all the challenges. I guess we've focused an awful lot on, what's happening in other markets. And I also chair Health Tech Ireland, the board of Health Tech Ireland. So I work with a lot of digital startups, really to the, the large medical device players like Medtronic and BD and that. But it's, we looked across Singapore, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and the UK. Really, they were the main countries that we considered. And I guess it was very interesting. Some of them are on, their second, third, fourth iteration of it. And I think what came through was the 4 themes, really, which was across all of them. So the first one was research, which is clinical research. The next one was data and digital. The third one was about innovation and how you can scale innovation for growth and also improve patient outcomes with that. And the final one was on the enterprise front of it. So I guess, when we consider Ireland with FDI, our, manufacturing, biopharmaceutical manufacturing, that footprint that we have, it's a phenomenal achievement. I spoke to Lord James O'Shaughnessy there a couple of weeks ago, and he said he couldn't compete with the IIEA when he was sitting as a minister in the UK trying to attract more industry to it. So we've done a phenomenal job. And then when you look to the west of Ireland, we've got this hotbed of innovation for medtech and medical devices happening there. So I really think the next piece is really to drive that Ireland Inc. piece from the clinical research and the data. So clinical research, I'm a pharmacist. I started my career as a CRA working for Zeneca. So I'm telling my age now, it was prior to AstraZeneca. And at that time, and it really struck me when I joined IQVIA, because IQVIA is a merger of two companies in 2016, one which was IMS, which was a pharmaceutical data company, and the other was Quintiles. And Quintiles has been present in Ireland since 1990. We actually have 500 people working here who are working on global clinical operations, but yet we've only 70 people here who are really focused on the enterprise enablement in Ireland. So when I joined, and I was quite excited about it, you know, IQVIA does about 20% of the global clinical research. So I was expecting a lot of activity in the clinical trials. And I actually realized back in the 1990s, the late 1990s, I had more sites as a CRA in Ireland, one company, than Ireland Inc. had with IQVIA. And it was actually quite shocking to me. So, and I feel quite passionate about it because international evidence, and I think we saw it through the pandemic as well, you know, companies that invest in research and innovation and clinical research, they're able to deal with pandemics like COVID better than other organizations. You've got a happier workforce because they're enjoying, and patients ultimately have better outcomes as well. And, you know, wherever you look, that is coming through in international evidence. And I think that's a very strong point that's made in the HRB strategy document as well. So I definitely think the clinical research, and the two countries that we would look at from a European perspective would be Denmark and Spain. And realistically, the reason for that is they've engaged in public-private partnership. They've really driven the clinical research. Spain in 2022, 60% of their R&D was clinical research. And that was valued at 854 million of an investment in commercial clinical trials. If you look at Denmark, a peer country to ourselves, they're way ahead. We're lagging behind them on the clinical research piece. Now, I know with the implementation of the National Clinical Trial Oversight Group, I agree with Mary, the National Research Ethics Committee was a game changer in relation to improving our startup times. But I really think that if we come together as Ireland Inc. and present ourselves externally as one site, because when you look at the size of the Irish market, we're a small country, we're the size of Manchester. So we really have to compete against those larger research centres. I think I was looking at the Spanish data, and they have like 169 centres in Spain working in research. But just speaking to a colleague there recently, and they were saying there's a phenomenal research centre in Texas, but it's full. It actually is saturated. They can't bring any more clinical research. And if you look at the global data on the clinical research, the EU, particularly the Western EU, is in decline. It's actually China. The States will always get their fair amount of clinical research. Terrible to say, but obviously it does relate to the sales of pharmaceuticals in those markets. That's what drives, you know, if you take the 8 top countries in the world, probably 60% of the global clinical research is happening there, which account for about 77% of pharmaceutical sales. So definitely I would feel that if we presented, we have a term prime site within IQVIA. And I really feel that if all the sites came together and operated externally as a prime site, and then we decided where best should the research sit, I think we could do a phenomenal job. And one example of that is the Matter Start, the early phase oncology site that's been set up. They just were working with us on a study. They were the first EU initiated site, which we were so proud of it. And they actually initiated 13 patients, way beyond what was expected, but they brought the first EU patient as well into that study. So we really can deliver when we put our minds to it. The next area would be the data and analytics. I guess that's the piece. We don't have the population insights. We don't have an understanding of the prevalence and incidence. And I certainly see it from other markets on what we can achieve. I guess, you know, when you look to the pandemic as well, it was the data that we were lacking to make decisions. I think that was the big challenge. But if we could actually build out that data infrastructure, and you know, that is part of the Digital for Care strategy to digitalize. But you know, there's some examples that we're doing while we're waiting for this digitalization is like mapping the cancer data that's in St. James's, you know, and that's going to be working with, it's part of a 40 cancer center consortium in Europe. We're providing the mapping and the natural language processing to help them with the analysis of that data. but it will actually enable some of the RWE, the real world evidence. And I think that's what people have recognized, even though clinical research will still be the gold standard. A lot of the regulators, I think healthcare professionals as well, but also, you know, the state, the payer, patients, if we had real world evidence, which has given us the evidence of the use of medicines or innovations in that real world setting, I think that is hugely, hugely beneficial. And certainly that would be a part that I would like to see of the strategy too. And then just innovation in general, and ensuring that we've got scalable innovation so that we can drive that forward. But I think with the data sharing piece, I know there's a huge move forward with the introduction of the new health information bill, but we definitely have to move away from that concept of protecting our data. We need to share our data. And if you do consult with patients, they want to share the data in the correct manner, not for commercial purposes, but, you know, we've seen lots of studies on this, that 97% of cancer patients want to share their data, but yet we've less than what, 2-3% that are participating in clinical trials. And when a company, you know, pharma sponsor is looking at it, putting an investment, whether it's a clinical research program or a real world evidence program, they want to know the prevalence of that patient population so they know that they're making that investment. It costs about $80,000 to open up one site in a country. And we have definitely seen a constriction or contraction of that from companies limiting it to various countries. They're reducing the numbers, but actually the recruitment times are taking longer. Whereas actually we would be feeling back to the pharma sponsors is open up more countries and then you can reduce those recruitment times. So I think from that perspective, that's where we as industry would see the huge benefits of it. And the other piece would be, you know, we would see Denmark as an exemplary market, what they've done with their life science strategy. And like that, it's multifaceted. It sits across a number of different government departments. I think it's 4. And I think that is what was required. They've budgets assigned to each of that. And we also see that they have big, you know, private-public engagement through a life science council. So I think from an industry perspective, that certainly would be our ask, that we would have a council involved, that you would be able to participate.
Well, it's certainly, as a former politician, it struck me that they have the department, the Minister for Finance, the Minister for Health, the Minister for Higher Education and the Minister of Enterprise all co-signing the policy, where I think most politicians' experience would be the Department of Finance stays out of everything and they just stand up with a big poster saying no. So that was a great achievement. Our next speaker is Ronan Glynn, and he had been former CMO, now with Ernst & Young. And I suppose he is very well known in Ireland because he was very central to the whole handling of the COVID crisis. And I suppose that was the high point where we saw innovation actually come to resolve a huge problem, because I remember hearing, was it 2 years before the earliest vaccine might be developed was 2 years, or and you know, it's certainly things must have been moved to impact the sort of innovation that happened. So be very interested to hear your insight, having been there and now looking at it from a more reflective point of view.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I suppose from an innovation perspective, I think if we step back for a second, the challenge, I think, around innovation in healthcare generally is that innovation typically, and this isn't just in Ireland, tends to be seen as adjacent to the healthcare system, as opposed to necessarily embedded within routine clinical practice or routine healthcare delivery. And so I think the primary or the first priority for us needs to be to look at the policy and structural conditions that will allow innovation to be embedded into routine practice. And so from that perspective, I think there's 4 critical enablers. And you know, over the course of the pandemic, we would have seen these to a greater or lesser extent in different countries. But the first is around data. We can't get away from that, both the data infrastructure and what I'd call the trust framework. So without good data, without good integrated data, we can't understand our population need. We can't respond to that need in close to real time. Without good data, we can't hope to deliver more personalized approaches to healthcare. And without good data, we can't foster that research and innovation agenda that's going to be so important for our life sciences strategy. But even if we had all of that, in the absence of a trust framework or a social license with our public around how we use that data, we'll be in trouble. Now, I think we're very lucky in this country. We have an educated population. Over and over again, surveys have showed us that people are willing to share their health data, both to improve their own health, but also for the betterment of public health. And I think we need to, we shouldn't take that for granted as we move forward. If you look at what's happening internationally, just last week, the NHS published their 10-year plan for healthcare. And at the core of that is a commitment to spend £600 million on a health data research service. And so they're seeing health data and the NHS itself as being an engine for innovation more broadly. And I think that's a really interesting mindset that we should consider. And just as an aside, a couple of years ago, EY did a study in the UK looking at the potential value of the data that's held by the NHS. And they estimated that between direct and indirect costs, that could be worth as much as £10 billion a year to the NHS and to the economy more broadly. So data and trust and engagement with the public around data is number one. I think second is faster pathways for adoption of innovation. So again, not unique to Ireland. We look globally, typically promising innovation to bedside takes anywhere from 5 to 15 years. There are interesting initiatives in different countries looking at how to do this differently. I think one that's interesting is in France called the Pekin approach. So essentially they're looking at digital therapeutics, and what they're allowing is for temporary reimbursement over a 2-year period, whilst real world evidence is collected to look at the actual real world impact or otherwise of these interventions. The third area then I think is being really clear on what are our objectives around innovation. And for me, I think we really strongly need to link what we're doing around innovation in healthcare with health equity, prevention and sustainability of our health system over the longer term. And so what do I mean by that? Well, again, if you look at the NHS last week, they've said, yes, they're going to invest in AI. Yes, they're going to invest in genomics, but they're going to do that with a focus on early intervention and early detection and intervention. So again, taking pressure off the hospitals, taking pressure off our EDs, and helping the system to be more sustainable over the long term. And then I think the final piece, and Mary focused on this, workforce. So if we're really going to foster a culture of innovation in the country, or from a health service perspective at least, our staff and the workforce there need to have the capability, they need to have the capacity, and they need to have the confidence to actually adopt and embrace innovation. And I think one of the things we saw during the pandemic was that a lot of what happened was ground up. And people in hospitals and in healthcare environments around the country saw what needed to be done, and they went and did it. And somehow we need to ensure as we go forward that innovation mindset is driven from the ground up rather than top down.
Well, thanks. I think there are very interesting insights, and maybe I'll throw a few questions before we start to take in. But one that struck me, and I think it will resonate. What's the opinion on the levels of siloed thinking and protectionist, fearful attitudes that are stifling innovation? It comes from Martin Lawler, and I think you might well turn that equally on the likes of myself as a politician. Our worries about innovation, and maybe given that Nicholas was saying that the first thing is to define what are the problems we want innovation around, maybe I'd throw it to you, Mary. Is there a way of maybe identifying core innovation challenges that are now in the health service that could, be fed into this strategy as, the first trial areas to address?
So I think one of the areas, and I think that's a good question from the audience, is about the siloed thinking. People are comfortable in their own zone or what they own. So I really do believe it's important that we break those silos down. It's not an easy thing to do because it means change, it means taking some risk. I won't say losing power, because I think if you engage with other people that have similar mindset, you progress things really quickly. When it comes to innovation, some of the challenges that we have in the health service are sometimes you have to take risks, and healthcare is often not in the business of taking too many risks or taking high risks. So I think a lot of that is communication with the public and the politicians, that to be innovative, you need to give what Ronan spoke about, a bit of leeway, particularly for those in the front line who are the people who engage with the public and with scientists to bring the innovation in. So I think with the life science strategy, that's our opportunity. Once we have a focus on exactly what we want to do, and then what we want to do in the beginning, very much what vision and delivery in Belgium is, but that is cross departments within government, and I think that's absolutely essential.
Yeah.
We have to, and I said about it earlier, we have to get ideas in healthcare from other systems, because everyone in healthcare looking at healthcare doesn't bring that innovation that we all need.
I recently heard a former British Minister for Health saying that the present system is totally unsustainable and will collapse unless there's innovation, which really put it very starkly. And could you comment on how you got over those siloed, the way people think in silos and are very risk averse within their own silo, and that sort of stifles the collaboration? Was there magic sauce you found to break that down?
A lot of patience, to be very honest, a lot of patience.
Patience, not...
Yes, not patience, but because at a certain point, you come to the realization that collaboration is key and that you cannot do it alone. And that's what we've seen now. We've brought all the hospitals in Belgium together. We've mapped their needs. And if you look at what's needed in Belgian hospitals, if we would look at that in Irish hospitals or in Dutch hospitals, or it's pretty much, there's lots of things that you would say, okay, here we do align. And we've presented that to our industry community, who are all eager to deliver their innovation. And that's that's how we've been setting up collaborations with companies providing needs that are sometimes for a hospital could be very innovative, but for real research-driven innovation, it might be still really early days or easy to solve. And I think that's really important to have a good idea of what is needed, but then ensure that you have those collaborations with the different providers of innovation, be it digital health, be it AI, but also therapeutics, new models. And that's, of course, that's something we've been building for quite a while. We have all those innovation players in Belgium. But I think I would like to go beyond that. And that's why I also took the trouble to come here, in addition to visiting Dublin in this beautiful weather, of course. But I think we need to look beyond our regional or country borders as well. There's lots of collaborations that we can set up. The European Commission has looked at how we've set it up in Flanders and have said, this is the model we want to go. We bring all these different technologies, therapeutics, everything, we bring it all together in one organization. And we've been involved now with Spain, with Denmark, in different collaborations in European projects. And there's a lot of collaboration there and support that you can get. And initially it might look, we need to stick within our region or within our country to build. But I think if you look a little bit further, and I think that's important, it's not only patients, but it's also the strategic vision to look beyond the real acute problems and look where you want to go, and actually dare to step into collaborations with other partners.
And well, thanks very much. Can I bring you in, Nicholas, again? I mean, this issue of crossing the boundaries. Like in Ireland, I can imagine the Department of Health's priorities at the moment are probably entirely different in the top of their head from the Department of Enterprise when they look at life sciences strategy. the Department of Enterprise, which I headed for some time, would see this very much as an industrial, and would probably be slightly intimidated by the need to get collaboration from the bottom up with vast numbers of hospitals to identify the issues. Is there a way of bridging that silo, which is probably at the heart of a successful life sciences strategy, is to make sure that the enterprise thinking and the health thinking can be brought onto the same page and to share priorities? How do you see that having been fixed in your experience?
Well, it's a really difficult question, but I think the first thing is, I mean, they are not necessarily opposing forces, right? The industry value and the healthcare value, because ultimately, and I think that's what make health a little bit special, is that ultimately the market in Europe is public procurement, whether it's reimbursement for medicine or it's procurement of medical devices inside the hospitals. So I think there is an alignment there. It's not an easy alignment, but there is an alignment. And I think I was trying to, I talked about finding the right topics for public-private partnerships. I think, Ronan, you were fishing in the same waters. There are, not all the problems are good problems for aligning these different systems, but there are problems which are good problems for aligning. And I give two examples. So we have a couple of Alzheimer projects that we funded, which are essentially looking at different ways of doing early intervention, early detection and early intervention in different hospital systems or different healthcare systems, and comparing the learning between these healthcare systems. And they're actually just been launching a piece of work to do health technology assessment across these systems. And I think if that's what we can help with from a European level, is to foster that comparison and collaboration, then I think there are things that we can't do at the European level, which is really these local conversations and shaping the national context. We talked about Alzheimer. We're trying to do the same in cardiovascular, be a project starting later this year, which is explicitly around comparing prevention, early detection, and interventions in urban regions across Europe. So similar type of setting, an urban setting, but very different socioeconomic and sort of societal context in these cities. And so that again, I think it will be really interesting, and then is an attempt to break down some of these silos by fostering collaboration across borders. But it's not an easy problem. I think that, but my core would be to try to identify areas where there is a strong shared value proposition for the different actors and start there and build it out from that trust.
No, excellent. Just maybe push it to you, Gwyn. I mean, one stat that struck me is among people of my vintage, 40% of conditions that lead to early hospitalization or reduced mobility are unidentified. And that has a huge impact on the health service and on the quality of life. If that was the problem that was identified, could we see taking that as just one issue, which I presume in disadvantaged areas that 40% goes up to maybe 60, 70?
Yeah.
Could that be a challenge that could be shaped into a collaborative challenge?
100%. And I think it really feeds into, like, it's Sláinte of Care, basically. That's the program of government. And what we're trying to for people to become more aware of their own self-care, what they need to do for prevention. But, you know, through AI, machine learning, we were able to get the data, and it comes back to the data. We need the data to inform policy, research, and treatments or outcomes. But if you had that, you could build your population-based resource. You could build insights. You could see what, you know, various factors were feeding into that. And we regularly, because we get a lot of data, but we regularly put like deprivation indexes on top of that so that we can look at different areas. We look at workforce planning. Maybe is there, you know, a higher instance in cardiovascular here because they don't have access to a surgeon. And it doesn't mean it has to be bricks and mortar. It might just be an outreach service that's being provided there as well. I think, you know, technology then can really feed into that with, people can be monitored remotely. A lot of them, we saw that through COVID with respiratory monitoring that was able to be done outside the home or outside the hospital in the home. So yeah, I think we have to take a challenge that's really, and then bring all the experts. And as we would regularly say, you're not invited to the table because of all the logos left outside the door. We're really looking at this as, a consumer of health, an Irish civilian, at some stage, a patient or caring for a patient, that we look at this, that we can address the overall problem. But I think it does fundamentally come back to the data as well. And the one thing we have to remember is our primary care is actually digitalized. If you look at GPs, they're all self-employed, but also pharmacies, it's all digital. The data is all there. We just don't have the information and the insights and to manage that. Yeah.
Well, I'll throw it open to, after this, just asking Ronan. I mean, you pointed to two intriguing things. We need clarity of objectives of innovation in the health level, and we need faster pathways. Can you give us some of the clarity of what the objectives should be of innovation from such a strategy? And secondly, on these faster pathways, what are the barriers that have, hampered faster pathways to adoption?
So I think I think we need to split out innovation and what fosters innovation in the health service from what necessarily this strategy can do. And I know there's huge hopes for this strategy, and certainly it has to, it will not be successful unless certain things happen within the health system. But I do think, we can't lay it on, I would suggest that we can't lay it on the strategy to be all things to all people. We can't lay it on the strategy to promote innovation within hospital environments around the country. So a lot of this is about what the health service needs to do as much as what the strategy needs to set out. That said, I think it'd be really helpful if the strategy does help us to align on some big goals over the longer term from a health perspective. And I mean, I don't have the answer to how we do that. Do we take an area, for example, like diabetes and obesity, because it affects such a large proportion of our population and will increase over time, and say we're going to become an exemplar globally for how we approach that from a research and innovation perspective? That's one option. The other option, as I said, is that we say, okay, we're going to really focus on the prevention agenda, or the sustainability agenda. Like the stat that keeps me awake at night, you mentioned the minister in the UK. Today in Ireland, about 35,000 people die here annually. 25 years ago, it was about 30,000. So we've seen a modest increase over the last 25 years. Over the next 25 or 30 years, that we're going to increase to about 66,000 deaths a year. So the pressure that's coming on our system in the decades to come, not today or tomorrow, but in the decades to come, is enormous. And I think we need mechanisms to think differently about how we're going to address those challenges. On the reimbursement, I certainly don't have the answer to faster reimbursement per se, but I do think increasingly there are examples all across Europe of how countries are, and they're all nascent. I don't think any of them are fully developed yet from what I've seen, but I think they're like Pecan in France. There are other examples in Germany where countries are trying to focus more and more on real world evidence and to essentially give new therapeutics and interventions a chance, albeit within the guardrails of not compromising on patient safety.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll throw it open to the floor. Yeah, at the back. Maybe you'd give your name, which I know myself, but others mightn't.
I think I know everyone on the panel. It's Evelyn Mulroe from Novartis. So I'm coming from a different perspective than previously. And I suppose it's fantastic to have this conversation with a panel with such experience, particularly in advance of the European presidency coming to Ireland. So it's 1 year exactly from today. And within that context, does the panel think there's a leadership role here for Ireland, for across Europe? And the question, it kind of leads from the previous comment, are the global CEO, Vaz, and the CEO of another company, Sanofi, wrote to the Financial Times last month about the challenge that exists for Europe at the moment in terms of this very issue of innovation and how we fund innovation in Europe. And there's a real movement away from Europe because of that lack of focus on creative and new ways to fund innovation. And the threat and the risk of that is that we start to lose the opportunity. And I was really taken with Gwen, with your stat on the countries where 60% of clinical trial activity is happening. 70% of those have really strong reimbursement policies. And I suppose that kind of connection is fascinating. And I think, do the panel feel that's something we need to really look at, not just from an Irish life sciences strategy, but a European? And do we have the ability to lead out on that next year when we have all the leaders of Europe in town and all the commissioners and all of those minds together? Because I really think creative and strategic thinking might be on the menu. So thank you.
Thanks very much. I don't know who would like to take that from the panel. Do we? I suppose we can't expect Nicholas to comment on the Irish, what the Irish will do about their presidency. So is there anyone like to comment? Ronan, maybe as
it's difficult to comment because clearly there's a whole range of competing priorities that the country will need to consider in terms of where it positions the presidency. I think there is an obvious opportunity here to play a leadership role around that innovation agenda, maybe not specific necessarily just to life sciences, but more broadly. But I think in order to do that, we need to almost use the next year to be confident in ourselves as a country about where we're going over the next 25 years in a way that we maybe did 20 or 30 years ago and said we're going down a track and we're going after that, and we've done that really successfully. I'm not sure right now we've got to the point where we're absolutely clear on where we're going for the next 20 or 30 years to replicate that success. And I think we'd need that in advance of the presidency.
And maybe I can ask Nicholas to comment, because I know it's very common in Europe to be talking about strategic leadership and strategic independence. Has Europe in this life science area been losing ground and needs a wake-up call?
Well, I think that the consensus is quite clearly yes on that, and yes, there was the question pointed to the article in Financial Times, but you could see the Draghi report, the Letta report, the European Life Science Strategy just a week ago set that out very clearly. I think there is a wake-up call now, and I think we need to collectively come together. And maybe that's my comment on the leadership. 6 months is very short, and so I think it's not the question of what you can do as a country; it's the question of what you can do together with other countries. And Denmark was held up as a good example. They are starting now. They will have to pass on the baton in 5 months and 3 weeks, right? And so I think there is a need for that continuation. If you want to get Europe into a leadership position, it can't happen within 6 months of a presidency. It needs a much more longer-term, sustained effort.
Okay, thanks very much. Any other people like to? Yeah, thanks yourself.
Hi, Deirdre Murray. I'm the director of the National Cancer Registry. Sorry, it's all about cancer today. But I suppose I just want to put forward a recent experience, and Evelyn would have been on this group. The Cancer Control Programme would have set up a national cancer research group to look at cancer research in Ireland, and to plan for the next strategy, which is due to run out in 2026. But, there was a lot of concern about that at the department level, because the fear is that the money, the funding for such a strategy would be landing in the Department of Health. So I suppose my question for the panel really is how, if this is going to, this life sciences strategy is exactly what we were looking for from the Cancer Initiative. But we need to get that cross-government commitment, and particularly in our current fiscal, there's a lot of caution and a lot of concern about what our what's going to be in our budgets, let's say, or what's in the bank from the government perspective. How are we going to do that? Because I think you mentioned, Richard, like the Department of Finance are, if they weren't cautious before, they're even more cautious now. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Actually, before I ask the panel I'd like to welcome Colin Burke, a former colleague of mine at TD and spokesman on health for many years and very interested in health issues. So would you like to take that question, Mary? Or?
From a Department of Health point of view, I think it needs to be recognised that there's never been so much money invested in health. I mean, there's 26 billion, which is a huge increase in the last few years. And it's trying to manage the expectations of those of us that deliver care, the expectations of the public, and the knowledge that most of the money goes to treat acute issues. As you well know, Deirdre, very, very little is put into our budget on health prevention. Health prevention is a long-term investment. Government cycles are shorter. We've seen how we can be leaders in health prevention when it comes to tobacco control and hopefully vaping soon, and many other interventions. But the expectation is that everything needs extra to get done, and whether that's a new health or research strategy, rather than stepping back to see what we have and how we can do things differently. Just because we always delivered something the very 20 years ago this way and it's really good, doesn't mean that there isn't something there that's better. So I think there's an onus on us as healthcare providers, whether it's academics or researchers, those who provide it, and an understanding of the public that we have a finite amount of money. Can we do things differently? Can we empower patients more to look after the population? It isn't always patients to do that, but it's not an endless budget, and I think we should be looking at the pot of money we have. Can we do things differently with what we have, and can we push more money into the prevention part, which is a long game?
Absolutely. There's a huge case for top slicing every budget and setting aside for innovation in every department, not just in health. I have a question here from Matthew Donoghue in the Blackrock Health Galway Clinic. Is there any discussion around establishing a national health research institute akin to the Harwell Research Complex in the UK? I know we've heard from people that centralisation is crucial. Is that a runner, or would it be relevant to an Irish?
I suppose most of our research is done in universities, and what you really want to see happening, and it is happening, is more collaboration across research. And I suppose Research Ireland would and HRB would drive that cross collaboration. It wasn't traditionally, everyone had their own agenda. To have, I'm not too sure where that would fit in the university landscape.
No, it's a good. The only example I know is NIBRT, isn't it? Which is the biological. It's a single sort of standalone research capability, but it's more training, and it's oriented towards training more than. But I think we are pretty unique in having everything housed in universities as opposed to dedicated research centres. But I'm not an expert. Is there anyone who wants to comment on that? Yeah. I'll take a question from the floor. Yeah. Sorry.
I can add to that.
Oh, yeah.
An example that we have in Belgium is a institute who actually was set up exactly to, it's an overcoupling, if that's a word, probably not, but it brings together overarching, thank you. It's an overarching institute that has a specific budget gotten from the government, and it overarches I think the main university research centers, the main universities.
There is such thing here. Research Ireland does that, but the conduct is within the universities. There aren't
separate. Yeah, exactly. It looks like that as well, but
it's a funder rather than doing research
Yeah,
itself?
they now do research
They do
themselves.
research
It's been
themselves.
added on, and also they're developing core facilities, or
Oh, right.
had developed core facilities which are managed by the institute as such. And so that brings a lot of value as well for collaboration again between different university research groups.
Yeah.
And I just to add to that, the ESRI, like behavioral research, implementation research, they're all really, really important in that research landscape, that not necessarily within traditional universities.
Absolutely.
I think if we so from a health service perspective, they're implementing something called the shared care record now. So that will be a record of every patient's health journey in the country. If you look at what's happening at European level around the HDS and health data sharing across Europe, I think what will be more important for us as we move forward is not necessarily that all of these different entities need to come together, but I think if we had a goal or a vision of an integrated data platform or data service, that a trusted research environment essentially, that is allowing all of those entities and researchers, again within the appropriate guardrails, to access that information and work together, that would be a phenomenally powerful engine.
We did some work with the NHS on their federated data platforms. I think they invested about 400 million over COVID. So we've put some privacy enhancing technology in there. And basically the data stays in the secure data environment, but it's sent to this black box and anonymized or federated, and then it disappears. You just have an audit trail of what's happened. You're able to share data that way as well. So I do think there is.
I'm going to take one last question, and then I'm going to give the panelists a chance to make a last gasp claim for attention. Thanks very.
Thank you. Lisa Goodman from Biopharmachem Ireland. So today I think it was a really great discussion around the different opportunities with healthcare innovation and highlighting the critical role that the Department of Health is going to need to play as part of the National Life Sciences Strategy. But obviously it is housed within the Department of Enterprise. So my question is, how active a role would you like to see the Department of Health play in the National Life Sciences Strategy? And how would you like to see that operationalized as well? Because I know we had a discussion around the Danish model and the council there. If you see something similar like that for Ireland, or if there's other ideas to make sure that there is that involvement and that recommendations for the Department of Health are actually rolled out in a meaningful way.
Yeah, no, thanks. It's, I suppose, a summary question that in many ways allows you to revisit some of the things you said, because it is around structures, it's around priorities, setting goals, setting ambitions. So maybe I'll just allow the panel in the original order a brief comment before we draw the event to a close.
It's absolutely essential that we're involved in the life science strategy, and I know there is work ongoing. There is a division within the department that specifically looks at research, analytics, and interestingly, international unit is within that. So the importance of that, particularly EU engagement. So absolutely essential. And since I've taken up the role as Chief Medical Officer, the skill set I brought in from a medical point of view is not just traditional, medicine. We've got mental health, we've got child health, we have public health. So our ability, and and we're there to support not only the Department of Health, but the other departments, and all of us would have research backgrounds. So I think we're particularly well placed to totally support that and the buzzwords in Europe are competitiveness, but also collaboration. And I think agility is absolutely essential in Europe. So I would hope, and the plan is to have a pivotal role to support DETI in this.
Thanks very much, Anne.
Of course, it's more a local question, I think, but I think what's always important in developing that is really looking beyond, like I said earlier, looking beyond the national borders and see how you can build on what's happening in other countries and collaborate, and not always. There's different countries who have really nice ideas that you can adapt to the local situation. And I think it's very important to actually do that and see how you can act together in a second level on a European level and bring it further.
Nicholas, maybe you are the person who can generate some of those benchmarks for comparison across countries, but do you want to react?
I mean, it's very hard for me to say anything about the local situation in Ireland, but I mean, we hear the topics that have come up here today, but also in the other national life science strategies. I can't imagine them being addressed without some sort of horizontal work across different departments. It's clinical trials, it's data, it's the sort of patient and public engagement, the building of trust, it's the workforce, and I think what we haven't talked about, but I see often being discussed, is the interplay with innovation and regulation. And so how can you create this type of sandboxes to allow experimentation before you have really locked down the rules of the sort of the coming 10 years? And I can't see any of that happening without a great deal of interplay between different departments in the government.
Thanks very much, Gwyn.
I think from my perspective, it's probably to think globally, but act locally. I guess I go back to my earlier point is that it is that multifaceted interdepartmental engagement. Taking the themes, I agree with Nicholas, those themes of research, data and digital, the innovation, how we can scale that, and also on the prevention element of it. But I think go back to it is to ensure that there is a life sciences council, you know, it's not just a consultation, that there is active engagement. Because I think if we work collectively together, we can deliver things very quickly as well and bring in that agility that is required as well.
Thanks very much, Gwyn. And Ronan?
Yeah, I won't get a chance to say it again, so I'll say it now. I think it's really important that we come at this strategy from a position of positivity. Like we have a vibrant industry in the country. We have one of the world's most educated populations. We have a vibrant academic sector. We have a health system that, okay, is digitally immature, but procurement has started. It is underway. Over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see enormous developments from the perspective of digital and data. And so I suppose I know it's motherhood and apple pie, but if we can come at the strategy from that perspective, rather than each department considering the potential funding challenges and risk that comes to them as a result of participation in this strategy, I think that would be a very good starting point for thinking differently about what the future might look like.
No, well, thank you one and all. And the one, having spent 43 years knocking on doors and trying to get the support of the public, one thing that did strike me was Nicholas's suggestion that patients should be involved in the design. I think we've had success with citizens' assemblies in Ireland where it has helped us to take on challenges that might have been seen insuperable. And I think, you know, being honest with patients and getting them in to help design some of these things where appropriate would certainly be a powerful lever and shift some of the conversation that happens around health, which is so averse to risk-taking or innovation. It's a very narrow failure metric that is applied to our health service. So I'd just like to thank the IIEA, J&J, but most of all, the panelists who have been here and you who have participated. I think it's been a very useful discussion, and it has the singular merit that something is going to come out of it and that we are inputting into a train that hopefully is equipping itself for a long and fruitful journey. So thanks one and all for coming, and we'll no doubt our sponsors will see you again.